Well, hello, this is Topher Field. I'm coming to you on election night, the Victorian election night, 26th of November 2022. And it's safe to say that things have not gone the way that certainly I hoped, and chances are, if you're watching this video, hasn't really gone the way that you'd hoped either. There's no point trying to put lipstick on a pig. It's not been a good night at all. But that's not to say that there isn't some silver linings or a few things we can take away from this. One of them is, of course, that we don't know the upper house results yet, and we won't know for some time. What we know is that as I recorded about 11 o'clock at night on election night, 26th of November 2022, it looks basically a certainty that Labor are going to keep power in their own right. They're not going to be a minority government, but they will be a majority government. And as things stand right now, it looks as though Daniel Andrews is going to retain his seat pretty comfortably. There's no real sweat there at this early stage in terms of the reporting is still only at about 7.5%, 8%, whatever it is. So things may change, but as things stand right now, that's where it's at. Now, of course, the main objective for the freedom-friendly minor parties was always to claim the balance of power in the upper house, and that remains unknown. We won't know for a few weeks whether that's been achieved or not. There are some reasons for optimism. There has been a continued trend away from major parties. This has been happening now for a number of electoral cycles, a couple of decades here in Victoria. And that trend has certainly continued in the lower house numbers that we've seen coming through. And if that translates across to the upper house, then there's some good reason to be optimistic that there's going to be a few freedom-friendly minor parties that are likely to pick up that fifth, that final upper house seat in a few different districts around the state. And if we're lucky, maybe even in all of the districts around the state, although that's probably a little bit optimistic if we're being honest with ourselves. But there is still a reasonable chance that the balance of power in the upper house is up for grabs. And even if not that, then certainly having some freedom-friendly minor party upper house members is a very good thing, as we saw with David Limbrick and Tim Quilty over the last couple of years of the pandemic, etc. But all of that's a story for another day. I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'll be reporting on what happens with the upper house as things become clearer. Right now, what does this mean for us? Well, firstly, if you're spending time on my social media pages, you'll know that this is a time for gloating from my handful of lonely trolls. And you know what? Good on them. Let them enjoy their moment in the sun. Their man has won. Their human rights abusing, power-hungry psychopath has won. Good for them. Let them feed the algorithm. Let them keep coming back and commenting and gloating as much as they like because they're feeding my metrics. But we need to take a bit of a wider view here. We didn't get what we wanted today. There's no shying away from that reality. But this is a much bigger issue than just one election. In fact, the fight for freedom, and by that I mean the fight for to be free from your government telling you what you must do and how you must live. Power is a zero-sum game between the individual and the government. Every time the government gets more power, the individual must, by definition, lose some of their power. That's been a struggle that's been going on for thousands of years, and it's going to be going on long after I'm dead as well. And our role is simply to do our bit, to play our part in that struggle when it's our turn. And if you're alive and breathing right now and you're looking at this video, then it's our turn. This is our turn. And we owe it to our descendants to do what we can in our time, in our generation, and pass to them as much freedom as we can. I would like that to be more freedom than what I was given when I was born. But you know what? The forces of history are far bigger than any one person. And sometimes freedoms increase, sometimes freedoms decrease. And we may be in a moment in history where individual freedom and liberty is under attack and is actually going to decrease. But I'm going to do whatever I can to protect and preserve and expand freedom as much as I possibly can and pass that to my children in the best condition that I possibly can. And that's all we can do in our own lifetime and in our own generation. So don't lose perspective. This is just one election. Yes, I wanted Daniel Andrews to lose. Don't get me wrong. I'm not pretending this isn't a blow. It's a blow. But it's one blow within the context of a much bigger battle that's been going on for a very long time, and a battle in which each of us are really very minor players, myself included. So let's focus instead on what this means in practical terms for us. Okay, Daniel Andrews is likely to be our Premier for the next 4 years. He said that if re-elected, he would see out the term. And at this stage, there's no reason to think he wouldn't. So what does another 4 years of Daniel Andrews mean? Well, for me personally, it actually carries quite a lot of risk. We know that Daniel Andrews is vindictive. We know that he has a lot of hubris, and he certainly enjoys lording it over people when he gets the opportunity. And he's been given the opportunity to really lord it over people like myself, outspoken critics of his government. I have criminal charges against me from Victoria Police for the crime of incitement. And he has now these permanent pandemic powers that allow him to, quite literally, if he just triggers another pandemic declaration, which there is no real criteria for, he can do that whenever he wants. He could do that tomorrow if he chose to. That instantly gives him the right to grab somebody off the street or to take someone out of their home, lock them up for 2 years without them so much as seeing a lawyer, much less a loved one. Now, I'm not saying he's going to do that, but he has that power. And as someone, as the director of Battleground Melbourne, someone who, if Daniel Andrews is vindictive enough to keep lists, and I'm pretty sure he would be, I can be reasonably confident that my name would be on any such lists. That's certainly something that I don't want to have to live with for 4 years, hanging over my head, even if you weren't to actually do anything. Just to have that there is not a healthy way to live. So my wife and I were already talking about and planning on leaving Victoria for at least a couple of years, regardless of the outcome of this election. As I've made the commitment, anyone that's been following me for a long time will know, I made the commitment I was going to stay in Victoria long enough to vote against Daniel Andrews, or in my case against the Labor Party, because I'm not in Daniel Andrews' seat, which I did today. And then we were going to leave, regardless of the outcome of the election. And that remains the plan. I can tell you the results today have not altered that particular plan. That's not to say we're leaving Victoria forever. In fact, there's a very good chance we're not leaving Victoria forever, but we're certainly going to be leaving it for a period of years and enjoy raising our kids in a smaller place, a smaller city that is more, I guess, ideologically aligned with us and who we are and how we want to raise our kids. So for us personally, that's kind of what it means. It almost kind of means no real change. It amps the pressure up a little bit because of what Daniel Andrews might do if he were to choose to be that vindictive. But in reality, it just means that we're going to continue making the plans that we were already making, which is to leave Victoria. I find myself, though, tonight really thinking about, and those of you that have been following me for a long time, you'll know this story. So I apologize for telling it again, but I think it's very relevant in this moment. The story of the old man in Venezuela. Now, my wife and I were in Venezuela in 2014. We were there for a friend's wedding. Beautiful, beautiful city, beautiful, amazing people. But at the time, it was the most dangerous place on earth outside of a war zone. You had to go to Iraq or somewhere having a civil war to find a more dangerous city than Caracas was at the time. Now, we went there. We had a wonderful time. We were shown around by locals who knew the city well, who understood its intricacies, its politics, etc., where to go, where not to go, when to go, etc. We had a great time. And one of the things that was really obvious and evident in Caracas City in Venezuela was that this place used to be rich. And it did. They were in the top 10 wealthiest countries on earth at one time, and they were at one time the wealthiest country in the Southern Hemisphere, wealthier than Australia. What happened to them? Well, socialism happened to them. They elected Hugo Chavez. They bought all of the lies of the socialist utopia. And one thing led to another, and over a period of only a couple of decades, they crashed from being, among the wealthier countries of Earth at that time, down to being among the very poorest. They are measured down with Zimbabwe and North Korea now. And all of that happened because of a handful of terrible government policies. And there was an old man in a jazz bar. And like I said, you could see that there used to be money. You could see it in the architecture. You could see it in the culture, the food culture, the music culture, if you had enough money to get food, that is. The music culture was incredible. And here we were in the basement of a building. It had a very Melbourne vibe, actually. It was down in this basement of an old 1920s architecture building. And we're sitting in these low-set booths with low backs on them and listening to this incredible jazz musician. And in the very next booth over, there was an old Venezuelan guy, very kind of wrinkled, deep wrinkled skin. And I got chatting with him and discovered his English was passable. We could communicate. I don't have really any Spanish at all, so his English was good enough. And we got talking, and he very quickly sort of sounded me out and figured out my politics. And it seemed like that was an important thing for him to figure out before he would really open up to somebody. And I let him figure me out, and then after that he opened up, and he told me all about how hard he fought to stop the socialists from taking over Venezuela, because he knew what price controls would do, what currency controls would do, what capital controls would do, what the government renationalization of industries would do. He understood all of those things in a way that the vast majority of people don't. And so as he saw the socialists clawing for power, he recognized the danger that represented to his country. So what did he do? He got politically active. He joined protests. He joined a political party. He stood on polling booths. He handed out how to vote cards. He did all of those things. Their system has enough similarities to ours. And unfortunately was not successful, and Hugo Chavez won. And he looked at me with pain in his eyes there in that jazz bar as he said to me, I did everything I could to stop this from happening, but the one thing I didn't do was make a plan B in case I wasn't successful. And he used that idiom, plan B. His English was good enough. I didn't make a plan B if I wasn't successful. And he went on to tell me about how so many other people had left and gone to, Florida, or gone to other parts of South America or Central America, gone to Spain and Europe. And that he stayed and he fought and he fought and he fought, thinking we can turn this around and resenting the people that were leaving. Until, of course, the reality was he couldn't turn it around. There was just a majority of people that wanted this. They believed the lies. They believed the false hope and the false promises. And he couldn't change their minds. And so he ended up stuck, and his family ended up stuck because he'd spent all of his resources. And as the country spiraled into poverty, he went with it. And he shared with me the pain of seeing his son lose his business and his life go to hell, and then watching his grandson growing up with the effects of malnourishment. Because as much as they could sit in a jazz bar and drink alcoholic drinks, they couldn't get fresh fruit and vegetables. They couldn't get basic staple foods anymore. And my wife and I saw that with our own eyes. Just the reality of life in Venezuela was horrific. And people think that must happen because, I don't know, there's jackboots on the streets or something like that. No, it happens because politicians with dangerous ideas get their hands on power and make wild promises that they simply cannot keep. And people believe them, and people vote for them. And there is a deep abiding concern in my gut that the state of Victoria is actually getting the government that it deserves. And that's not a good thing. I had this sense in my gut as I was watching the results coming in. This must have been what it was like for him, having done all that he could, watching the results of that election of Hugo Chavez come in, and knowing in his gut what it meant. Now, I remember his face vividly, and I remember sitting there and watching. I know what a man's eyes look like when he feels guilty and responsible for his grandkid being malnourished. I know what that man's face looks like. I've seen it. And I made a commitment that day that I would never be that man. I'll fight tooth and nail, but I'm not going down with the ship. Because as much as I might think that it's noble for me to make that sacrifice, I'm not making that sacrifice of my kids. I'm not making that sacrifice of my wife or my grandkids. So from my perspective, without wanting to be alarmist, I look at Daniel Andrews' policies. What do they look like? What's he doing? And everywhere I look, I see price controls. I see massive amounts of debt on completely absurd, unfunded, no business model infrastructure projects, the urban rail loop and even the airport rail loop. These are absurd projects from a cost to benefit analysis point of view that are going to take on enormous amounts of debt for no real return. We're looking at the return of the SEC, state-controlled energy. Now, of course, energy is already very much state regulated. They control it, they just don't own it. Daniel Andrews wants to return it to state ownership. This, of course, is something that Venezuela did. They returned all the refineries and all the oil production. I mean, Venezuela should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They have the largest proven oil reserves per capita of any country on earth. And yet, they're in poverty and they're starving. Why? Because the government took over energy, took over oil production, and completely ran it into the ground, destroyed the whole entire industry from Venezuela. And I look at Daniel Andrews' policies, and I look at Daniel Andrews' instincts over the last few years, and I get very, very concerned about what that could mean for the future of Victoria. Now, the saving grace, of course, is that Victoria is a state within a country. Venezuela is its own country. When you have the president of a country making these decisions, it's far more devastating than when it's the premier of just an individual state. He only has so much power, after all. But nevertheless, I'm very, very concerned about the future of the state of Victoria. And I've already made my decision. I made my decision back in 2014 when I was sitting with that man in that jazz bar that I will not be that man. I will not be that guy. And when I see the writing on the wall, I will keep fighting. I'm never getting out of the fight. I will keep fighting. But I'm not going down with that ship. So my wife and I plan to continue with what was already our plan, and that is to spend some time away from Melbourne, away from Victoria, explore other parts of this beautiful country, in the hope that one day we'll come back. But we'll see. So that's for us personally. But what this says to me in that bigger scale is really the same thing on a grander scale, and that is we can see the writing on the wall. We can see the problem. We're all trying to raise the alarm. That's what you've been doing. That's what I've been doing. And yet the vast majority of people in Victoria want to run further into the problem. They want to reward the person that is the problem. And that's incredibly dangerous, because what it means is the problem actually wasn't Daniel Andrews. The problem was us. And I say us in that collective, the whole of the Victorian population. It was us. We rewarded that. When he said that we should be grateful, we said, oh yes, we are. We're most grateful. Premier Daniel Andrews. And that's terrifying, because that's actually a harder problem to fix. How do you fix us? Right? If we're getting the government that we deserve, then in order for the government to get better, we have to get better. Not just you and I, me making this video, you watching this video, but as a body corporate, as a people, we have to get better. And that's a long-term project. So how do we fix this? Well, I'm staying in the fight, even as I leave Victoria, which like I said, I was already planning on doing before, regardless of the result of this election. My wife and I had that conversation very early in this year, and we made that decision. We're leaving Victoria. It doesn't mean I'm leaving the fight. My role in all of this, I believe, is education. It's helping people to understand these issues better than they've ever understood them before, and giving them the tools to be able to articulate these issues back to other people in conversation, in debate even, where they can actually then carry these ideas out into the marketplace of ideas. What I realise from both the federal election in May 2022 and also now the state election in November 2022, and what I hope that New South Wales learns for their 2023 state election and other states learn, is that when freedom-friendly parties talk about the solutions that we have to offer, the problem isn't that people don't like the solution. The problem is that people don't realise there's a problem. We're telling them we have the solution, and they're like, oh, is there a problem? I can't see a problem. Oh, no, there's no problem here that I know of. I'll just keep on going with what I've always done. We're trying to give them a solution, and they can't even see the problem. So my role, as I see it in 2023, as I regroup for next year, hopefully moving out of Victoria and moving into a smaller town, a slower pace of life, a more friendly pace of life, surrounded by people that are a little bit more my kind of people. My focus is going to be on producing content on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else that helps people to understand the problem, and therefore, in so doing, helps them to understand the solution. Education is the issue here, and we know that our education system doesn't do a great job, and it's certainly not designed to help us understand what the real problems are. And so it's up to us to try and fill that gap. So my role is education. People don't recognize the solution because they don't understand the problem. When we talk about freedom, we saw UAP used it, freedom, 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 up on big billboards during the federal election, and with the Freedom Party of Victoria used it in their party name in the state election. Nothing to great avail. No, it didn't really achieve a lot in either of those cases. Why? Because people say, well, we already have freedom. But if you actually got them to sit down and define it, would they even really understand what it is? Let's be real for a second. Have you ever really sat down and had an in-depth conversation trying to wrap your mind around what exactly freedom is? I'm not saying that to have a go. I'm just saying we don't have these conversations. It's not a subject in school. And maybe the reason why our solutions aren't cutting through for people is because actually they don't understand the problem. You and I maybe understand it at an instinctive level, but I think we've got to move past that and really move into the ability to discuss it, to articulate it, to be able to debate these ideas and convey these ideas out to other people before they're going to understand the problem. What is freedom? Why is it important? What does it look like? What are the limits of it? How do we protect it? Why should we protect it? Etc. These are just simple, fundamental questions that most of us have never actually really sat down and thought through. So that's my big focus in 2023. I'm going to be focused on education, specifically around the basics of freedom, the basics of human rights, the basics of government. That's what I'm going to be focused on all the way through 2023. So my message for you tonight is chin up. Tough day, no question. There's no point sugarcoating it. It's a tough day. But chin up, because tomorrow is a new day. There are still some silver linings yet to come out. We don't know what's going to play out in the upper house. Don't lose perspective. Right? Don't get so focused on this one election that you lose perspective on the bigger battle that we're all a part of. But also, in having that bigger perspective, ask yourself whether from that big perspective you should be staying where you are or not. I can't tell you what to do. I don't know your circumstances, your situation, your headspace, what you want out of your life. I don't know. But ask yourself the question, And those of you that have been following me for a while know this is not a new question. I've been addressing this question since before COVID came along. The question of being a digital nomad throughout the world, potentially having multiple passports, these sorts of ideas. Now, I'm not going to that level yet, but I don't feel like I have to stay in Victoria and go down with the ship. Now, maybe you do. Maybe that's a choice that you want to make for yourself and your family. And in that case, well, I salute you. But that's not the choice I'll be making for myself. And I just want to encourage you to actually ask yourself that question. Don't be panicking. Don't be apocalyptic about it. This isn't the end of the world. But as you step back and get that bigger picture perspective, it's not the end of the world. It really isn't. But at the same time, should I be staying in the part of the world that I'm in right now? I think it's a question worth asking. But also stick around. Stick around on my YouTube channel, my Facebook page, my Instagram, my Twitter. I do have a Rumble and I do have a Telegram, and I've got these other things that I don't actually post on, but things get pushed out to them. Because I'm going to be producing a lot of content in 2023 aimed at identifying and helping people to understand the problem, so that when you come to them with a solution, they're much more likely to grasp the solution. And what I need you to do is to like, to subscribe, if you're on YouTube, ring the bell. You know what to do. You hear people talking about this stuff all the time. Go to topherfield.net and join my email list. That's really the most important thing to do. So topherfield.net, because the email list is the most reliable way for me to be able to stay in touch with you through Christmas, New Year, and then into 2023, as I try and bring some more education to this problem and try and actually get to the point where we as a people can start to deserve a better government, and maybe in time we'll start to have one. The next couple of months for me may be light on for content. I've been pushing to get through this election and keep things up till then, but we're just a couple of weeks away from having our third baby, which we're very much looking forward to. And then, of course, it's Christmas and New Year and all of that sort of craziness. And then hopefully we're going to be moving house shortly after that. So this is probably going to be a really intense couple of months in our lives. And so you know what? Posting is going to be on and off and light. And I apologize for that, but it's just how it has to be. Family does come first. But once we're back on our feet, we've relocated, and we've found our feet again in the new year. Come 2023, you're going to see a lot more content coming from me, specifically around this problem of freedom and understanding what it is, of human rights, understanding where they come from, what the limits of them are, how they interact with each other, because some of them seem almost contradictory. All that stuff, there's answers to all of those sorts of questions, but we're not taught this in school. We don't learn this anywhere else. So that's my self-appointed role, I guess. As someone who seems to be able to communicate, I want to take these ideas and communicate them to you, and hopefully give you the ability to then communicate them on to others. So please stick around. Please continue to support my work. Like, subscribe, comment, share, all of those things. And I'm sure I'll be back online before the new year, before the baby comes, etc. I'm not saying there'll be nothing coming from me, but things might be a little bit light. And if I don't see you before the new year, I look forward to seeing you then for 2023. We're going to go again. This ain't over.